On our broadcast tonight, Korea signs its 11th free trade agreement with Australia, eliminating tariffs on major trading items for nearly 60% of the country's export markets. Microsoft terminates public support for Windows XP, making the bulk of the world's ATMs as well as many PC users vulnerable to security threats. Plus, Western leaders voice concern about heightened tensions in eastern Ukraine as pro-Russia demonstrators in 3 cities proclaim their independence from Kiev. These stories and more next on ARIRANG News at 8. Good evening and thank you for joining us. It's Tuesday, April 8th here in Seoul. I am Yoo Ji-hae. We begin this evening with Korea-Australia relations in full bloom. Following a bilateral summit between President Park Geun-hye and visiting Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott in Seoul, the two sides signed a free trade deal and agreed to boost security cooperation. Our Choi Yu-sun has our top story.
Less than a month after concluding a trade deal with Canada, Korea signed its 11th FTA with Australia. Seoul and Canberra agreed to remove tariffs on a majority of traded goods over the next decade.
Is that it will be very good for both our countries because trade means jobs, freer trade means more jobs, freer trade not only means more jobs, but it means better friendships.
President Park Geun-hye talked about the great potential for energy and resources development cooperation by merging Korea's advanced technology with Australia's vast resources. But their meeting wasn't just about economic ties. The two leaders also adopted a vision statement in which they agreed to discuss a blueprint for security and defense cooperation.
에벗 총리와 저는 영내 안보 지형이 급변하고 있는 상황에서 외교, 안보 분야에서 공조 강화가 중요하다는 데 의견을 같이 하고
Australia also expressed support for President Park's trust-building and reunification initiatives with North Korea, while calling on Pyongyang to put down its nuclear arms and to abide by its previous denuclearization commitments. The vision statement also referred to Seoul and Canberra's joint efforts towards regulatory reforms and streamlining red tape. Similar to President Park's deregulation drive, the Abbott administration has pushed for reform measures such as holding a massive repeal day twice a year to boost Australia's competitiveness and to create more jobs. On people-to-people exchanges, the two leaders agreed to actively support Koreans visiting Australia on working holiday visas and Australians coming to study in Korea as part of Canberra's New Colombo Plan. Choi Yu-sun, ARIRANG News.
And now that the trade pact between two of Asia's largest economies is a done deal, our economics correspondent Na Young-kyung takes a look at which sectors are expected to benefit most from the Korea-Australia FTA and which ones may take hits.
Korea's trade ministry expects the free trade agreement between Seoul and Canberra to bring about $1.6 billion worth of benefits to consumers within the 10-year period after the pact is ratified. Korea's chief FTA negotiator Woo Tae-hee says Korea's small and mid-sized businesses especially will reap the benefits.
Australia has very high trade volumes with Asian countries. Therefore, competition among Asian nations is fierce within the Australian market. This FTA will help our SMEs gain a competitive edge in the exports market to Canberra.
Australia has agreed to remove tariffs on 99.5% of their items within 5 years of the deal's ratification. The Korean government evaluates this as one of its most ideal and complementary free trade pacts. Its reasoning is that Korean manufacturing goods, automobiles, and petroleum products, for example, will see a boost in exports, while Australian mineral resources, including crude oil, will benefit from tariff removals. But those opposing the deal remain concerned about its effect on Korea's agricultural industry, as tariffs currently ranging from 18 to 72% on meat products will be eliminated 10 to 15 years down the road. Along with the recently agreed FTA with Canada, the Trade Ministry says it plans to continue closely working with agricultural professionals to come up with more comprehensive measures that will minimize any negative impact this deal could have on the nation's domestic sector. 나현경, 아리랑 뉴스, 세종.
And staying on the trade front, some welcome news for Korea's auto exporters. They enjoyed a strong month of March thanks to robust domestic and overseas demand. Our Song Ji-sun has more.
Demand is picking up in advanced markets for more expensive Korean vehicles. That was the driving force behind the nation's second highest monthly tally for exports of automobiles in March. According to Trade Ministry on Tuesday, auto exports last month came to nearly $4.7 billion, just $500 million short of the record set just 4 months earlier. This thanks to overseas demand for high value-added cars like large sedans and recreational vehicles. Orders for SUVs surged more than 26% from a year ago, a hint that the U.S. economy may be on the road to recovery. On the other hand, subcompact and small-sized cars saw relatively weaker growth. All indicators, including production, domestic and overseas sales, marked strong growth compared to the same month last year. Domestic consumer sentiment picked up with the launch of new models, and sales of imported cars also spiked 30% from last year to represent 11% of the domestic market share. Song Ji-sun, 아리랑 뉴스.
Over in Washington, the nuclear envoys of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan have wrapped up their first trilateral discussions in 5 months. The officials pored over ways to prevent further provocations by the North and possible countermeasures in case Pyongyang goes ahead with another nuclear test. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
Amid growing threats of another nuclear test by North Korea, the top nuclear envoys from South Korea, the United States, and Japan met in the U.S. Capitol on Monday local time. The meeting was a follow-up to last month's trilateral summit in The Hague and is the first such meeting since November. South Korea's chief delegate Hwang Jung-guk told reporters after the talks that the officials focused on ways to prevent further North Korean provocations. They also discussed implementing stronger sanctions with the UN Security Council should their efforts fail. Hwang added the three officials agreed to seek various ways to resume dialogue that will lead to North Korea's practical denuclearization. Following the trilateral session, the South Korean envoy met separately with his U.S. counterpart Glyn Davies and his Japanese counterpart Junichi Ihara. Protesting a UN condemnation of its recent medium-range ballistic missile launch, North Korea raised tensions last month when it threatened to conduct a new type of nuclear test. This sparked concerns a fourth nuclear test was in the works. Recent satellite images of North Korea's nuclear test sites suggest Pyongyang is increasing its capability to conduct future tests, although no signs of an impending test have been detected. But some experts say the regime could push ahead with a nuclear test in the coming weeks, in time for U.S. President Barack Obama's visit to Seoul and Tokyo later this month. Hwang Sung-hee, 아리랑 뉴스.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Yoo Ji-hye for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Move aimed at fostering startups is part of the government's 3-year economic innovation. In local politics, Korea's opposition party has backtracked on its pledge to abolish a party nomination system ahead of June local elections. It said it will finalize its decision within this week after taking into equal account the votes of party members and the opposition opinions, that is, of the public. Our Connie Kim reports.
Korea's main opposition, New Politics Alliance for Democracy, has said it'll reconsider a previous pledge to abolish its party nomination system ahead of the June local elections. Speaking to press on Tuesday, An Chol-soo, co-leader of the newly formed opposition party, said his coalition would make a final decision after taking into equal account votes by party members and public opinion. It's a shift from the main opposition party's original stance. It had previously said it was going to do away with the party nomination system completely, as it can be a breeding ground for bribery and corruption. Both the ruling Saenuri Party and the opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy pledged to scrap the party-centered nomination systems during the 2012 presidential campaign. But the ruling party retreated from its pledge earlier this year, adopting instead a bottom-up nomination system that involves both members of the party and the public. The New Politics Alliance for Democracy is expected to make a final decision on the nomination system this week. An's announcement comes one day after the presidential office of Cheongwade turned down his request to meet with President Park Geun-hye for talks on scrapping their top-down systems. The ruling party criticized the opposition party, accusing it of playing politics with the issue and overturning numerous pledges. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Korea's fiscal soundness worsened slightly last year, something the government is attributing to a rise in the country's national debt last year. That comes mostly from an increase in the estimated amount of money that the government will have to give to beneficiaries in the future. Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
Korea's finance ministry said Tuesday that the nation's sovereign debt, including that of regional governments, came to around 483 trillion won, or roughly $460 billion last year. That is up around $40 billion from 2012. The ministry attributed the rise to an extra budget that was arranged to boost the domestic economy last year. The national debt to gross domestic product also inched up about 1.5 percentage points last year to 33.8%. The figure still stands far below the OECD average of around 100%, meaning that the nation's fiscal health remains sound. Experts say, however, the rapidly aging population could lead to a bigger fiscal deficit in light of growing welfare spending, whereas fiscal income remains subdued.
The rate of increase of government revenue will slow down due to the nation's low birth rate, so the Korean economy's fiscal soundness could face problems probably after 10 years.
Korea's fiscal deficit to GDP stood at 1.5% last year compared to 1.3% in 2012. It marks the highest figure since 2009 when it was 3.8%. The government debt does not include pension liabilities that the government will have to pay out to beneficiaries in the future. Korea's total liabilities, including the pension obligations, rose about 20% to more than $1 trillion last year. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
Samsung has forecast yet another drop in profits. The world's biggest smartphone maker says it is on track to post a second straight quarter of profit decline as slowing smartphone sales continue to weigh on earnings. But our Kim Ji-yeon says it's not all bad news, as analysts see a silver lining.
Just shy of $8 billion. That's how much operating profit Samsung Electronics banked in the first 3 months of the year. And while the figure is high, the Korean firm may not be pleased. Released Tuesday in a provisional report, the profit is up 1.1% from the previous quarter, but represents a 4.3% drop from the same period last year. Samsung Electronics also saw a sales tumble nearly 11% from the fourth quarter of last year to $50.2 billion due to market saturation and new iPhone releases from Apple. The fresh news comes on the heels of a sharp cut in earnings in the fourth quarter of last year, when operating profits dipped 18% and sales fell nearly 8% from the previous quarter. Also looming are the huge sums Samsung may have to pay out due to its patent disputes with Apple. The Korean company has already set aside $290 million to prepare for potential damages from the disputes. But analysts in Seoul say the Korean tech giant's performance in the second quarter will improve. They expect Samsung's operating profit to jump to around $8.8 billion in the April to June period. Analysts say this week's global release of the new Galaxy smartphone will likely boost sales of displays used for mobile gadgets.
Among the divisions at Samsung Electronics, the display sector is expected to improve the most as manufacturers are geared up for the upcoming release of the Galaxy S5. Prices of OLED and LCD panels are also stabilizing.
Shares of Samsung, which fell about 10% last year, closed slightly lower on Tuesday. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Korea's aviation industry has grown leaps and bounds in recent years, winning contracts with Iraq, the Philippines, and Turkey. With those deals as momentum, the government is now ready to take things to the next level. Our Kwon So-ah reports.
The nation's aviation industry plans to reach higher ground in the future by putting more of an emphasis on exports. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy unveiled an aviation export industrialization strategy on Tuesday, with an ultimate goal of becoming one of the 7 most advanced nations in the sector. The goal is to expand exports from the $3.6 billion reached in 2013 to $20 billion by 2020. To make it happen, a customized financial system for the aviation industry will be set up. This would include designating the industry as a subject of trade insurance and promoting and attracting private capital. Also, a total of $460 billion will be funneled into manufacturing new aircraft models for export through 2020. Joint research and development with the military is to be expanded as well. Vice Trade Minister Kim Jae-hong also put emphasis on developing unmanned aerial vehicles to catch up to countries advanced in the industry. Tilt rotors, unmanned aircraft that can take off and land vertically, will be included. The government also has an eye on winning overseas contracts with Boeing and Airbus to manufacture parts for their aircraft, worth around $11.5 billion in the next 3 years. To enhance competition and discuss areas that require improvements, a special task force will be established that will pinpoint 5 specific policies to help things get off the ground. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
Microsoft is pulling the plug on its support for Windows XP this Tuesday. Now, this will leave anyone still using the 13-year-old operating system without critical security updates. The change not only affects personal computers, but also ATMs. Our Shin Se-min tells us more.
Microsoft termination of Windows XP poses a great security threat to Korea's financial system. Starting Tuesday, Microsoft says it will no longer support the 13-year-old operating system, which means no more updates, no free or paid assisted support options, and no online technical content updates. ATM services may also be affected as nearly 75% of the machines worldwide run on Windows XP, according to the manufacturer NCR. Well over 90% of the 87,000 ATMs in Korea have not been upgraded from the Windows XP system, raising concerns that the rest are prone to security risks. Windows XP PC users have upgraded and received support for years, but that help will no longer be available. At least 1 in 5 personal computers worldwide still run on XP, and while consumers are entitled to carry on using it for as long as they like, those who choose to do so will be much more vulnerable to hackers, viruses, and other security risks. Software will no longer be made to be compatible with XP. In other words, fewer applications will be compatible with the operating system. Although Microsoft has not revealed a reason behind its termination, industry experts say the company is trying to eliminate the competition as it has produced 3 other operating systems since the release of Windows XP in 2001. Microsoft is ending support for everyday consumers, but it'll continue to maintain and upgrade XP system services in a corporate environment.
Some rumors are estimating around a $5 million bill per year, or $200 per PC per year for the first year. Microsoft plans to double it every year as well to $400 and then $800 3 years down the road. So they are punitively basically requiring companies to upgrade within the next 3 years.
Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
It's time to check on some of the stories making headlines on the global front with our Paul Lee at the News Center. Paul, let's start with a fresh crisis in Ukraine. Pro-Moscow demonstrators have now seized government buildings in other eastern Ukrainian cities. What's been the reaction out of Kiev?
Well, this latest development has sparked fears of a possible second Crimea and even civil war. But U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says Washington is keeping a watchful eye on the situation and warning Russia to back off. Our Sun Jung-in has more.
Russia has warned Ukraine against any use of force in the cities of Kharkiv, Luhansk, and Donetsk, where pro-Russia activists have seized government buildings to mark their independence and support the vote to join Russia. The Russian Foreign Ministry in a statement called for the immediate stop of any military preparations, warning that it could lead to outbreak of civil war. The move comes as Ukraine launched an anti-terrorist operation and arrested about 70 protesters on Tuesday, according to a Facebook post by Interior Minister Arsen Avakov. The latest developments have prompted warnings against Russia over further destabilizing efforts in Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry told Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov that Washington is closely watching events in eastern Ukraine with great concern, and that any moves to destabilize the region would incur further costs for Russia. The two sides are said to have discussed holding direct talks between Ukraine, Russia, the U.S., and the European Union to defuse tensions. White House spokesman Jay Carney said the U.S. was ready to impose further sanctions against Russia should the situation escalate, adding there was strong evidence that some of the protesters were paid and were not local residents. Sun Jung-in, ARIRANG News.
There's certainly a deepening divide in that region. All right, Paul, let's move on to the hunt for the missing Malaysian airliner. We did have some good news over the weekend of possible signals from that black box. Paul, what's the latest development on that lead?
It's day 32 of the multinational search for Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. And even though investigators say we may be very close, nothing significant has been found yet. 28 military and civilian ships and aircraft were sent out on Tuesday to search for debris in the southern Indian Ocean. Regarding the two pings detected yesterday, the chief coordinator of the search efforts, Angus Houston, says they haven't heard any more transmissions from the suspected black box. Meanwhile, China's and U.S. Navy ships are continuing to scour the remote waters off the western coast of Australia. Authorities have not ruled out mechanical problems as a cause for Flight 370's disappearance on March 8th, but say evidence suggests it was deliberately diverted.
Let's hope time hasn't run out and the families of the victims will finally learn what's happened to their loved ones. And moving on now, Paul, let's focus on Japan and its deal with Australia and submarine research.
That's right, Jay. Just a week after relaxing its decades-old weapons export ban, Tokyo has signed an agreement with Australia to jointly study submarine technology. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and his Australian counterpart Tony Abbott reached the agreement during their summit Monday. Both leaders agreed to focus on marine hydrodynamics as part of their first bilateral defense technology project. Their defense and foreign ministers are slated to meet in Tokyo in June to discuss further details of the new pact.
Right, Paul, lastly, let's turn to Indonesia. The country is gearing up for an election, which are slated to kick off tomorrow. Tell us more.
Well, Indonesian authorities are making final preparations ahead of key elections on Wednesday, in which over 186 million voters are expected to head to the polls. More than 6,600 candidates from 15 political parties are vying for the 560 parliamentary seats up for grabs. The key legislative election takes place every 5 years, and in 3 months, Indonesians will also be voting for a new president. Early opinion polls show the opposition Democratic Party could lead the race, thanks to the popularity of presidential candidate and Jakarta Governor Joko Widodo. The results of the election could bring major changes to the world's third largest democracy as it recovers from military rule 16 years ago. GA?
All right, Paul, thank you very much for that update. We'll see you back in just about 2 hours. And time to get a check on the weather with our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Now, Bo-kyung, it was a beautiful spring day here in the capital, but I hear some regions are dealing with dry conditions.
That's right. A dry weather alert has been issued in some regions, including in Daegu. Humidity levels there are down to 14%, so please be on the lookout for forest fires. Taking a look at the current conditions, the nation is under the influence of a high-pressure system from the West Sea, which is why we are seeing clear skies across the map. Well, tomorrow, daytime highs in most parts of the southern regions will jump to around 25 degrees, so it should feel more like early summer weather. Otherwise, light passing showers are forecast in Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province from late tomorrow evening through early Thursday morning. Looking ahead at tomorrow's readings, Seoul peaks at 20 degrees while Daegu jumps to 26 and Gwangju reaches 24. Other regions such as Daejeon tops out at 23 degrees, Dokdo and Mount Kumgang make it to the mid-teens. Well, that's all the updates I have for you this hour, but I'll be back with more after 10.
Thanks, Bo-kyung. And that brings us to the end of our newscast. I'm Yoo Ji-hye in Seoul. Join us again for more news updates on our primetime news at 10 p.m. Korea time. See you then.